Part 2, the opposition. More cards. Thanks for coming back. If you haven't watched part 1 of this series, I strongly recommend you go back and do so before you continue here. Just a side note, if you are of the roughly 18% of the population that is okay with the militant woke destroying all monuments, burning down private property, parts of cities, literally wanting no more police of any kind, tearing down churches, etc., all to make statements about social justice, I'm going to save you some trouble and time. Just stop watching this video series right now. You're not going to agree with anything that I'm going to say. Save yourself some time, give me a quick thumbs down, and go about your day. For the roughly 82% of you out there that believe that the militant woke are bad, or if you're not sure and think that maybe they have a point and you're kind of on the fence about it, but you have an open mind, please keep watching. And with that out of the way, let's get right back into it. I say opposition because the people of Santa Fe are not attempting to force change on anyone, but quite the opposite is happening. Drastic change is being forced on us, the people of Santa Fe. These forces are opposing who we are and who we have been, and we are responding to that. The opposition by no means represents the opinions of Native Americans generally. Therefore, these rogue small groups are in opposition and have become the oppressors of our culture and history. Cards number 3 and 4, Red Nation and the Three Sisters. Red Nation and the Three Sisters are organizations that are behind most of the recent protests, vandalism, spectacles, and attacks against Santa Fe, our history and culture. They are relatively smaller groups in comparison to their similar larger relatives like Antifa, but they have some people in some very important and influential places. Red Nation has continued to grow for over 4 years and boasts connections in some other countries, including Venezuela, and influence in some high places in some of our universities. While both are relatively newer groups, you can consider Red Nation much like the bigger brother to the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters being the more local of the two, and Red Nation being more widespread. Please be patient. I'm going to be linking all these little sketches together later in the series, and we'll look at the whole picture, but for now, let's focus on these groups. Starting with the Three Sisters, we're going to use a mad sketch to represent them because every time we see them, they're really mad, like very, very angry.
You have made me very angry. Very angry indeed.
But that's a commonality shared by all extreme militant woke social justice warriors. They're always mad and always yelling at somebody. Here's a picture of them at a historical Santa Fe site making obscene gestures at it. Here's a social media post of them threatening to continue this and stating that they're just getting started with Santa Fe. And here's a picture of them on stage with their good friend, our mayor. But more on that later in the series. If the Three Sisters and Red Nation run out of people to yell at, they'll even start yelling at the very people they claim to be yelling for, but that's the extreme woke for you. Keep in mind, when I use the name extreme woke, I am not talking about common sense ideas of equality that we should all be able to agree on. Them and their angry friends come to our plaza and yell at us for literally days about how racist we all are and how we are directly responsible for generations of perceived guilt of some real and some imagined atrocities from centuries ago and stuff like that. Red Nation is a bigger group that backs and supports the Three Sisters. We'll use angry stick figures for them because they're always also mad and running around trying to burn or knock everything down. We'll also use stick figures because it's funny, and in my opinion, years from now, it will be the way history looks back on them. Little angry stick figures running around causing trouble. Maybe that's just because they want to be mad about something. I tend to think that because the focus of their anger has not been consistent over the group's relatively short lifespan. The only consistent that this group has ever shown is extreme anger. Notice the fist symbol in everything they do since day one. This is also a common general militant woke symbol, although it's been more normalized lately. So you will see just regular people wearing it on t-shirts and stuff. So here is the Three Sisters, and here is Red Nation. What is the end game for these groups? If someone is so set on attacking a culture and vandalizing a city, it only makes sense to ask, what do they want? Well, let's go to the source and find out. And so I'm just going to read some things off of their own website. Communism is the horizon. Notice the background picture that they're using, because you're going to see a lot of these things repeating phrases like defund the police. They actually mean that. They really mean that. They mean zero police ever again, any kind of law enforcement at all. And obviously they're in front of the obelisk in Santa Fe. A little bit further down we see revolutionary socialism. The Third General Assembly formally adopts revolutionary socialism and liberation as the primary political ideology of Red Nation. While incomplete, the purpose of this proposal is to articulate the basic principles of revolutionary socialism and Marxism and its connection to indigenous socialism and communism. So these people do not believe in any type of land ownership, or they don't value or believe in personal property, things like this. And at least these guys come out and say what they think. So we do not seek a milder form of capitalism or colonialism. We demand an entirely new system premised on peace. Well, if you look a little further into what they say, it's really premised on theft. We organize through education and agitation for evolutionary change. They've said this for years, and so what they mean by that is they come to agitate communities, to come and do protests, to come and yell at people, knock statues down, monuments down, even get arrested. They come to agitate, to intimidate people, to accept what type of change they want to bring to communities. The end to capitalism, colonialism. Liberation is not about healing or getting over it. It is a struggle for material and structural transformation. We will build a new world from the ashes of empire, a world where many worlds fit in. And this is kind of starting to allude to what they want to do. So they are all in for destroying the current structure that we have. Their philosophy wants to tear everything down. And they start small. They start in communities, putting seeds of doubt in people into our history. They get people to question where we came from, question history, question what we actually are. And they start changing the minds of people slowly over time so that they can do their end goal, which is to tear down all of the civilization that we have, because they think that they can build a better one. Out of the ashes from fires they started, they think that they can build something better.
Eliminating Columbus slowly but surely. What we are doing is rewriting history.
Politicians can't do what only mass movements do. This kind of gets into the philosophy of why they wanted to forcefully take down monuments in Santa Fe, because they see the mayor as having his hands tied to do what he would really like to do, which is true, and so they say, we'll just go and do it for him, illegally, violently. We will be able to capture the momentum of the next rebellion and catapult it into a full-blown mass movement. We will fight for the redistribution of wealth stolen from us, whether it's land, water, air, or labor. And when they say stolen from us, they're alluding to things that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. Nobody's stolen anything from these people. And here they go more about what they think about the police, because of course the crazy things they want to do can never be done if there's police enforcing current laws. So one of the first things they want to do, and one of the things that they are most outspoken about, is defunding the police and actually abolishing them completely. Because if the police aren't in their way, then they can go and enforce Marxism, socialism, graduating to communism on society. That's the way this goes. The jail system included as well, by the way. They don't think there should be jails anymore, or even really any kind of a deterrent or punishment for people who break the law. Now, I know all this stuff is as ridiculous as it sounds, and a lot of you watching this video may think to yourself, well, of course this stuff is never going to happen. And I agree with you. Of course it's never going to happen. I'm just trying to give you a picture into some of the organizations that are coming to Santa Fe to protest, to tear our monuments down, to do all that kind of stuff, because they're not going to stop doing this. And if we're going to have a conversation about how we're going to move forward as a city, we've got to be able to look at and understand the people that are coming in to oppress us. We've got to understand the people that are coming in, the organizations that are coming in to try and enforce their idea of what is right on us. And another thing that's very interesting is that they want to abolish juvenile detention facilities, but get this, they also want to abolish child protective services. They don't think that child protective services should be funded anymore. How crazy is that? And to me, what's equally as nuts about all this is that they think that all of this stuff will decrease violence on a mass scale. And that falls on its face by so many metrics. There are no new ideas being represented here by Red Nation and similar groups. Actually, instead, extremely old ideas that have historically failed over and over and over every time they've been tried. And there they are at the bottom, a sample of them with their fists in the air again. Except for that poor old lady, I don't think she knows where she is or what she's representing. She's like, say what? Where am I? Am I supposed to hold my fist up? Anyway, they really make a thing about being anti-capitalist, pro-communist, just over the overall of their literature, and anti-colonial. And just a quick word about capitalism. All capitalism is just free and open trade. That's it. If you own a salon and you cut someone's hair for money, you are exercising capitalism. That scale obviously gets much bigger to huge companies and all, but all capitalism is just two parties or more freely exchanging a good or service for compensation. That's all that is. We advocate for global decolonization. We'll look at that a little closer in a little bit, but that's crazy. That's just full out nuts. I mean, these guys are saying they want to deglobalize the entire planet. Does that mean like send everybody back to where they came from? So if you're going to say that, then how far back are you going? Because people have been moving around the earth and colonizing certain places for millennia, Native Americans included. So at what point in time, is my question, do they think that it's fair to send everybody back to? The whole thing's just stupid. And you can see this right on their website, Indigenous Socialism. Communism fulfills all that begets life on Mother Earth through the overturning of all forms of private property. Okay, all forms of private property. That's crazy. Another thing that I find interesting is that they want to back up time. They seem to have a rose-colored tinted glasses that they're looking at the past in, as if before Spanish settlers came here, everything was peachy keen. And it was not. It was actually far from that. Revolutionary socialism is the primary ideology of the Red Nation. The state and revolution, transition from capitalism to communism by Lenin. These guys are quoting Lenin. Karl Marx also. I mean, talk about pick your heroes here. So we know what they want to do on a global scale, but back to our town, back to our corner of the world, what does land back mean? They keep saying this. They say it on their websites, they spray paint it to deface the city, and they say it directly to me. On my last video, they made some comments, one of which was land back. Now this is the part where it really isn't funny anymore. They want to erase any history, culture, or remnant of anything Spanish related because the Spanish were the first to arrive from Europe and settle here. The ultimate colonizers to them. They want to erase colonizers and any remnant or influence that they've had through hundreds of years. Of course, I guess that means they have to give all their cell phones and cars back. They resent that the Spanish came here even hundreds of years later. I mean, did they really think that as people multiplied on the earth and technology and knowledge and travel increased, as cultural evolution continued to progress humanity along, that no one was ever going to come to the Americas, and that if they did, this was somehow immoral? What kind of sense does that make? None. What these groups are calling for is a direct attack on Spanish culture, just as a side note to their overall worldwide agenda. This is actual racism against the Spanish culture and people in the name of anti-racism. Let's forget for a second that they literally want to abolish all the police, destroy the current society, forsake our founding values. Back to our little corner of the world, they want to change the names of our schools. Or did you think that the tearing down of De Vargas Junior High was somehow a coincidence? They want to change the names of our streets and shopping areas. And this is just getting started. This is like football players before a game just warming up before the game even starts. They want to change the name of Santa Fe itself. These activists have even started manipulating online neutral information sources about Santa Fe. They want to tear down Cross of the Martyrs. They want to abolish the fiesta completely, the longest tradition celebration in the United States. But it doesn't stop there. Oh no. They even find our museums offensive and any positive knowledge of our history and past. Although it varies in different places, the attack around here in Santa Fe and the surrounding communities is mainly on Spanish history and culture and anything that has to do with it, in addition to a couple of federal monuments, because let's be like Portland now. And yes, I know what the inscription on the monument used to say. They want to completely erase anything that has to do with the Spanish culture unless it depicts the Spanish as evil. That means our historical churches are on the chopping block as well. Within some of the inner circles of these extremist groups, there is talk of attacking even the Catholic faith itself and representations of that, as they see the Catholic Church and its history as all bad and oppressive. You might be tempted to shrug this off as extremism that would never actually happen, but this ideology has accomplished larger things than this in other areas and cities. For example, the 2 Catholic churches that were set on fire in Chile recently. And closer to home, St. Patrick's Church in El Paso was vandalized. This is becoming more and more commonplace. So let's not be so arrogant or lax that we continue to let our guard down. Santa Fe, with its one-of-a-kind history, would be and is a glorious target for these radicals. I don't want to have to make yet another video ever again saying, "I told you, Santa Fe." You might also think that these things would never happen out of a blind faith in some of our locally elected leaders, and if only that was the case. I'll shatter that idea in a later part of this series. This literal land back demand is actually at the root of what they want. They literally want the ownership of the city land transferred to them, their groups, and who they think they represent. They know these aspirations are impossible due to law enforcement, so then they openly call to abolish the police and the jail system completely. Just like a school bully who somehow needs to get rid of the supervising teacher on the playground so he can beat up other kids. This is the same thing. This movement is in process of and wants to change the education system to selectively forget certain parts of the Spanish history that they don't like, or parts that make the Spanish history look good, and repaint that to show the Spanish all as devils, and then teach that to our children starting at the elementary level. The opposition cannot effectively wage war if there is peace. And so they work to remove the symbols and celebrations of peace that we've had for so many years. They demonize those things and call them racist. This trend in education is already a far advanced agenda at UNM. For confirmation on that claim, here's part of a Zoom call I had with the chairman of the Hispanic Roundtable of New Mexico, Ralph Arenades. Ralph Arenades, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate it so much. You are the chairman of the Hispano Roundtable of New Mexico, correct?
Right. I'm Ralph Arenades. I'm the chairman of the Hispano Roundtable of New Mexico. We're a coalition of over 50 Hispanic organizations, Hispanic partners across the state of New Mexico with 50,000 members tied to our partners.
Awesome.
So, we seek the advancement of education, employment, civil rights, social justice, and environmental justice for Hispanic Americans
I know that you have some experience, at UNM, and I did kind of want to know your general take on the current state of college level Spanish history and culture that's being taught over at UNM, and how you think the Spanish culture is being taught to our kids in general.
Well, let me just first off say that our Hispanic culture, Spanish history is not, is only being taught well by very few individuals. I would say Dr. Joseph Sanchez is doing a great job with teaching about our history and our culture. And I think he's probably the most knowledgeable about our New Mexico history, probably the most knowledgeable historian in New Mexico. He's written probably 32, 33 books. And but I think overall, instructors at UNM and most colleges and universities in the state and in the country teach a very negative view of Hispanics, of Spanish history. What's being taught is that the Spanish came to rape, pillage, and commit genocide.
Right.
That's just not true.
What do you think is the result of that kind of influence on our kids' education?
Very bad. I mean, primary example is what happened here at the Jornada. A lot of those rioters, and I don't even call them protesters, they were rioters,
right,
that attacked the Jornada, were students from UNM.
Yes.
Led by instructors from UNM, like Moises Gonzalez from the School of Planning and Architecture. I mean, for months and months, he was beating the drums. Oh, we're going to bring down Oñate. We're going to bring it down. We're going to bring it down. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this guy's a professor at UNM, and UNM's not even calling him out and say, hey, you work for this institution. You don't represent us that way, or our agency like that on Facebook, and beat the drums of violence
right
in this community.
That's right.
And also influencing young minds to attack New Mexico history and commit crimes. I mean, he was literally saying, bring your ropes, bring your chains. Chainsaws are optional. Bring whatever you want, spray paint. This is a university instructor saying this on Facebook. Facebook banned him, but UNM didn't.
Right. Yeah.
So, no, I think they're doing an injustice. UNM is doing an injustice to our young minds, our students, our community's young minds, and they're doing an injustice to our community and to our society.
Yeah.
When you're filling their vulnerable minds with baloney and calling it leadership, or calling it a protest, or calling it social justice, there's something very wrong with that.
Anyway, I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much, man. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot, man. Good luck to you, and keep up the great work, man.
Now, I'm going to go into some specifics here, but before I do, I want to make something clear. I am in no way implying or wanting these people to be harassed online or otherwise. Do not contact them. Do not message them. They are the agitators, not us. We're better than that. With that being said, let's take a closer look at Red Nation. Red Nation was founded in or around 2014 by Nick Estes and Melanie Yazzie. And to my knowledge, Elena Ortiz is still a co-chairman. Red Nation started off as more of an environmental activist group mixed with fighting for Native American rights. And so far, I'm mostly okay with that. I mean, everybody pretty much believes that we should be good stewards of the environment, right? Everyone thinks Native Americans should have land rights, and possibly even more than they have now, right? Red Nation made an all-out statement at Standing Rock with the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline that was being built. There was some various protests about drinking water quality, some stuff like that. Eventually, they seem to settle on a general Marxism and communist message and the idea that past generations of Native Americans were unfairly treated, and this generation needed to pay the price. Estes is an assistant professor of education at UNM. Yazzie is an assistant professor of Native American Studies at UNM. Here's Estes meeting with the Venezuelan foreign minister. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about Venezuela, but if you want to talk a case in point about why socialism doesn't work, just look at Venezuela. They are a modern day example of why these things are a pipe dream and lead to 1,000 times more suffering than good. But unfortunately, some people value their idea of fairness above good for some. So if everybody's poor, I guess then that's cool. This is an interview that Estes gave with a communist magazine. Nick Estes tells us why the past and present of the indigenous resistance means there must be no future for the United States. And of course, this is more of the same, just to back up what I've said before. For example, if there's a lesson I want to impart, it's that cops and colonizers are not your friends. So they view cops as cops, and they view the Spanish culture as colonizers. We started as a coalition and quickly evolved into a full-fledged membership organization. There are now what we call freedom councils in Gallup, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, with more springing up in the Bay Area, New York City, and South Dakota, and at large membership around the country. And from the beginning, we've adopted and practiced socialist left principles of organization. Again, Red Nation statement, revolutionary socialism is the primary political ideology of the Red Nation. And then here's really where the rubber meets the road to their end goal. We see socialism as the transition toward communism. Just as capitalism took centuries to establish itself, we know socialism won't happen overnight. It's already been a long, bloody process with significant victories and defeats. And look at the guy who's interviewing him. His most recent book is Riot, Strike, Riot. Again, I'm just trying to show you guys how whack these people are. They do not represent Santa Fe. And switching to Yazzie, remember, Estes and Yazzie co-founded Red Nation. You can even see who these people hang around with are Marxists. And confirming here, Yazzie is a chair of the Red Nation. Yazzie is editor-at-large for a publication called Decolonization, Indigeneity, Education, and Society, where you can find pieces like this one called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, in which they openly discuss a complete lack of concern for what will happen to regular people when they kick them out of their homes. In a piece for Gizmodo, Yazzie writes concerning the Land Back movement, "When I state this demand in public presentations, I often get a question from the audience asking me to specify the land I'm referring to. I usually answer by saying, the entire U.S., which means all of it." Well, that's fun stuff. I guess we should start calling them Emperor Estes and Darth Yazzie for now. Ortiz is the local out of the bunch. She's the individual who stood up, yelled genocide, and made a ruckus and took off at the school board meeting in 2018 when the decision was made to eliminate La Entrada. By the way, the idea that La Entrada had anything to do with genocide to any degree has been debunked by historians many times over. Unfortunately, the school board wasn't smart enough to understand this, and when we tried to tell them that, they instead chose to listen to the lady screaming in the meeting. That was Ortiz. Red Nation is full of extremists, saying and doing extreme things. Red Nation isn't, in other words, a one-trick pony. Rather, the protests on the plaza, they're talking about our plaza, count as part of a multi-pronged approach to liberation that includes academic scholarship, policy work, community organizing, direct action, public education, and building a world where colonialism no longer exists. So they're talking about our plaza, and they're talking about a prolonged approach to what they want to do. They talk about and brag about their involvement in the protests in the 2 years before this to demand the end of this racist celebration of indigenous genocide, which it was not. Guys, on my channel, I have a historian that I interview that talks about the Entrada. It had nothing to do with genocide. The Entrada is a celebration of a peace treaty between two peoples. And check this out, this internal memo from Elena Ortiz to the Red Nation. Look at some of the things that she's saying when she's talking about protesting here in Santa Fe. She actually gives advice on how to deal with police, getting ready for being pepper sprayed. If you get tear gassed, do this. Have a plan for being arrested. Make sure your cell phone is charged. If you plan on going to jail, plan on it. Bail, lawyer, time off from work, witnesses. Don't just go to jail without training. Make sure you're trained to go to jail. So that begs the question, why would any of these peaceful protesters, quote unquote, land up in jail? You only land up in jail if you're breaking the law. Peaceful protesting is part of the First Amendment. Cops aren't going to stop you for that, but they will stop you for breaking the law. So built in this is the presupposition that they're going to break the law. And they're going to do it in Santa Fe, and they're going to repeatedly do it.
Don't talk to me about that. You guys are in the wrong.
Shifting a moment to the Three Sisters, although their website is not as openly communist as their friends and supporters from Red Nation, make no mistake, they have been key activists in the vandalisms in Santa Fe and commonly stoke the fires of racial division.
And in that process, we were like, the obelisk has to come down now. We reached out to allies that we have. Surge is supporting us, Red Nation.
They always leave things 100 times worse than they found it. At the same time, they use phrases like bringing the community together and similar catchphrases that actually mean nothing. The Three Sisters have been given a grant and permission to paint several murals across Santa Fe, and that is in progress. There used to be much more controversial content on their website, but now that they have been cast into a mostly negative public light, and with the police looking closer at them, it's been largely gutted. As of the making of this video, even the About Us page is empty. Funny thing is, I don't think that the Three Sisters' motivations are completely nefarious, unlike Red Nation. It's becoming almost stereotypical across the country with these identitarian Marxist-leaning groups that they are great at organizing and having huge public statements and protests about something they're mad about, and then they proceed to do 100 times more harm than good to the community. Then, sometimes, a couple years after, when they are finally able to be honest enough with themselves to figure this out on their own, they just kind of fade away, leaving the community worse off than when they showed up. The Three Sisters are overall an extremist group, promising to continue to do extreme things in our community, regardless of who it harms. They've made one thing very clear: their contempt for the history and origins of Santa Fe, the Spanish culture with its traditions, festivals, and heroes, and their pledge to work to eliminate it all. And if that means misrepresenting history or erasing beloved parts of another culture, so be it. Ask yourself, does that sound like real social justice to you? Or just more like a bully hiding behind words like equality and justice? I think it's the latter. These two main groups and their proxies are the primary agitators that are targeting Santa Fe, that see the Spanish community only as colonizer oppressors instead of friends of the Native American community. Unless, of course, some colonizers agree with them, then those ones they'll like. I'm going to say that again. They see the Spanish history, culture, and community only as colonizer oppressors instead of friends. They fail to recognize simple facts, like the Native American people were once also colonizers of this area, and once also displaced a people group that was here before they were, just earlier in history. By the standards they use, the only group of people on the planet that cannot be labeled as an evil colonizer is anyone whose family has been living in the Middle East, likely Mesopotamia, for at least 100 generations, because modern DNA ancestral science and every main world religion agree that this is probably where all of civilization came from. Literally everyone else on the planet colonized from there to populate the earth. And now we have mixed race people everywhere, and it's kind of wonderful. The idea that exploration and settling all over the earth was somehow immoral, or it was okay when Native American ancestors did it only, is silly. In my opinion, their base philosophy is full of error, and so they're doomed to eventually fail. Only question is, how much damage will they do to the Santa Fe and Spanish cultures before it does? Cards number 5 and 6. The militant, woke, pseudo-social justice cloud, and money and resources. I call this a cloud because it's a good way to frame it, at least for now. It's loosely made up of various national and regional organizations that commonly change names or shift around, sometimes on purpose to avoid a solid identity that can be prosecuted or sued in a court of law. This collection of people share a common cause in the philosophy and belief that absolutely nothing in our country and our current system is fair or just, and it must all be torn down. They heavily focus on and embrace militant woke culture, identity politics, and are a form of social justice warriors that have nothing to do with actual justice. They are a hive for extreme leftism to the point of socialism, and for those that can stomach it, full-blown outright communism. Some of these groups want equality so bad that even if it's equality in poverty, to them they think that's a step up. They are well-funded and share supplies and resources for like-minded sister groups. Most commonly, these resources are either funding and or actual people in the form of protesters or often paid protesters that are bussed into various communities to make these woke social justice protests appear to have much more local support than they actually do, and or to intimidate the local community.
We reached out to allies that we have. We posted on social media.
And because the majority of these protesters are not from here, they have no local reputation to be concerned about. It's not like their aunties or their grandmothers are going to happen to be downtown Santa Fe and see them behaving this way. They can stand on the stage in our plaza and make as much of a scene as they want without care for what people think of them, because some of these people will never be in our community again. They don't know us. We don't know them. They can stand there and yell at us how bad we are all day, hop back onto their bus and go back to wherever their home is, get paid a few bucks, and call it a day. Red Nation and the Three Sister are connected to and are part of this extreme militant woke cloud collective. If they want to make a statement in our community, like when we saw the monument come down or during our fiestas, all they have to do is reach out to this militant woke social justice cloud collective and ask for help. They will likely get it from activists already in the community. And if that's not enough, they can direct plenty of additional people to come here from other places also. Although they usually keep their shared social media pages private, sometimes they get sloppy, and I have found posts on related pages last summer calling for reinforcements in Santa Fe. Let's look at some of these individuals that were supplied by this network and that have damaged and vandalized our city, that came here to spread hate masquerading as justice. Lily Sage Schweitzer, 33, from Pennsylvania. She is suspected of being one of the original organizers of the protest downtown on October 12th, when the top of the monument came down. She's also suspected of providing transportation for other protesters who are not from here, in addition to providing various supplies, including the chain and rope that were used to take down the top of the monument. She posted for help and reinforcements on social media to this militant woke cloud, as I call it. And remember, when I say words like suspected, I do so because this is still pending lawful judgment. But we do have video evidence of this. We can get on videos and see this happening. Ryan Witt, 29, likely from Maryland, is suspected and accused of climbing the monument and attaching the chain and rope that was used to topple the top of the obelisk. Also accused of tearing down and throwing a police barrier and spray painting the monument. Dylan Roble, 27, arrested for battery on an officer, resisting, etc. Dylan is likely from Salem, Massachusetts. Sean Sunderland, 24, was arrested for resisting and criminal trespass. Sean is likely from Albuquerque. If I had to guess, he's probably a student at UNM, along with some of these other people. Melissa Rose, 44, is a member of the Three Sisters Collective, and Lauren Straley, 24, Melissa's daughter, were charged with criminal damage, conspiracy, resisting, evading, or obstruction of an officer, graffiti, all of the wonderful things. The most recent to be charged is Zach Young, 26. Zach is charged with criminal damage over $1,000, conspiracy to commit criminal damage, criminal trespass, resisting, evading, etc. Here's some footage of Zach. Although the Cloud card does give money and resources still gets its own independent card because these groups get money and resources from other places also, like government grants, federal grants, private donations from others who share their philosophy, etc. They're really good at raising money. Card number 7, other minor groups and random activists. There are other smaller groups, if you count 3 people as a group, and specific people from our community that share in the tear it all down or this system is 100% unjust philosophy and mentality with a twist of anti-culture mixed in. They aid Red Nation and the Three Sisters by providing a small number of locals for a face to continue the facade that the protests, destroying monuments, etc. is primarily a grassroots movement when it's not. See this strap pulling down our monument? Although there was several people assisting, the main guy at the end of that strap is a guy named Stephen Fox, who is originally not from Santa Fe but has lived here for many years. We'll get back to some of what his motivation seems to have been in a future part of this series. Don Furlong, another local that was arrested and charged with criminal damage to property, conspiracy, unlawful assembly, criminal trespass, and graffiti. Furlong actually has a GoFundMe for her newly acquired legal expenses that was started up by this guy, Christopher Harris, who has a pretty checkered past of his own. Although I've done enough research to know many more of these individuals involved, their names, information about them, I'm not going to name drop all of these people here because I think it's in bad taste to put some of these people on blast when a number of these activists, some of these people, I think are just kind of like fish out of water. They're just looking for somewhere to belong. It's kind of sad, really. I don't think all of these are necessarily bad people. I think there's a percentage of them that are confused. Most people need a social construct of some kind to validate their value as human beings, a place to belong. And with less people having families, less people attending churches, less people being part of a closer-knit community in our neighborhoods, and with social media taking the place of actual in-person groups and relationships, even before COVID, you find more and more people searching for a place to belong, a place to fit as a person and find meaning in life and camaraderie with other human beings. Unfortunately, extremist groups like these often attract people looking to fill those natural human needs. In return for a place to feel belonging, these groups exploit and use them as a face for their destruction to our home. But at the end of the day, well-intended or not, they are part of this destructive trend in our community, and so they get their very own card. So wrapping up here, as I was making this video, I asked myself, is there anything positive that I can say about Red Nation or the Three Sisters? Am I being too harsh? Am I just so angry about what they're doing and attempting to do in our community that I can no longer think objectively? So I went back and looked at these groups and individuals again from that angle, and I can say that I cannot find anything redeeming or good about Red Nation. Not one thing. When it comes to the Three Sisters Collective, I did find something good about them. They are outspoken and passionate about missing and murdered Native women, and on that front, I wish them well. Red Nation also talks about missing and murdered Native women, but it gets buried in the sea of such ridiculousness that it doesn't feel like actual concern. It's like all the communism, no more personal property, no more police, no more child protective services, kick out anyone who isn't native from Santa Fe forever, rip them from their homes. Oh yeah, and we care about missing Native women. I mean, honestly, some of their stuff really comes across like it's written by an angry 8th grade kid. It's honestly laughable. And to think these people are educators at our major universities. What is this world coming to, guys? Part 2, takeaways and conclusions. Number 1. The groups that are continuing to organize protests and vandalisms in Santa Fe and elsewhere that target our historical treasures and the Spanish culture are radical by the very definition, to the point of openly calling for our current society and country to burn to the ground. They themselves, as well as their sister organizations, openly brag about using Marxism and socialism mixed with localized agitations as a tool to eventually usher in communism. And yes, I'm talking about the type of communism that all our grandparents had seen and were terrified of. These groups include Red Nation, and through support of, and by proxy, the Three Sisters Collective, among others. Number 2. These and similar groups are to a modern, evolving, and growing society what an autoimmune disease is to the body. They are rogue, sick, confused individual cells that have grouped together and attack otherwise healthy cells and organs, completely convinced that they are doing the right thing. If left unchecked and unchallenged, their destructive ways will continue to harm our community. For our purposes, in our local community, this is evidenced by the purposeful mistelling of Spanish history, hatred of Spanish culture, symbols and celebrations of Spanish culture, and things that have overall been of great benefit, in addition to an open desire to tear everything down, which in other words is basically anti-culture. This has resulted in escalated attacks against history, culture, and traditions. For more on this type of cultural phenomenon, I recommend a book called The Black Swan, where author Nassim details the mechanics of how a radical minority can steer a well-intended majority population in a self-destructive way. Number 3. These groups organize with other similar groups in a way that gives them support in numbers and financial backing. This results in things like additional protesters being bussed in, often paid, and called in from far out of town to give Santa Fe protests the appearance of strong local support that's not really there. This is also effective in intimidating our community, as well as confusion when coupled with support from some locally elected leaders using words and phrases like fairness, justice, coming together, etc. Number 4. These groups use various strategies to attract locals and well-meaning individuals, convince them that they are fighting for a good, just cause and against a historical evil that has somehow gone unaddressed, and turn them into radical activists that stay in their own targeted towns and localities. The worst kinds of activists are the ones that honestly believe that they're doing good when the actual results are the opposite. Number 5. Some of the driving forces for these trends are taught and encouraged from our education system, including UNM, where some of the founders and leaders of these extremist identitarian groups teach as professors. They encourage a new type of thinking that is completely intolerant of other perspectives and work to attack what they disagree with. Listen to this conversation an activist recently had with Mayor Weber.
This is a dangerous structure culturally for this community. This is a physical manifestation and representation of the physical danger that the concept of this structure poses for the community.
More on this in a later part of this series. Number 6. Red Nation, the Three Sisters Collective, and activists are not going to stop easily. They have openly said for years that they are going to work inside and outside the legal systems to chip away at and completely change our history, culture, and city itself. In fact, they literally want it all for themselves. While this goal is ridiculous on its face, they have proven good on their word to consistently work to continue this end. Their goals are extreme, from aspirations of aiding larger groups to bring socialism to the United States, then graduating to communism, elimination of police in all forms, even to the point of wanting to reallocate the ownership of all of the land that our city sits on. These goals are a pipe dream. Achieving these goals are extremely unlikely in the highest degree, yet they repeatedly promise to not stop until they achieve these. Given the current city government and state's leadership and methods of dealing with this, the result can only be the continuation of the same pattern. Likely years of this agitation and chipping away of the historical Santa Fe and Spanish cultures. This end result is racist against the Spanish culture. Number 7. These extremist groups often send mixed signals, using words like democracy, freedom, justice, and at the same time, using words and phrases that are in direct opposition, like love of communism, calls for elimination of any law enforcement, jail, or punishment for criminals, calls to end all personal ownership of anything. This is and has historically been a commonly used tactic to distract and confuse by groups whose success is dependent on distraction and deception to succeed. They have to lie in order to be successful because their philosophy is that bad. Nobody would go for it on its face. Number 8. The results of these extremist groups and individuals have been harmful to the Spanish, Native American, and general Santa Fe cultures. No question. Number 9. These groups are in process of taking power and voice away from the rightful leaders and governors of our Native American pueblos and communities by stealing the spotlight, claiming to speak for Native Americans generally, and subverting past decisions and statements by official Native American leadership. In my opinion, in addition to an outright attack on Spanish culture, Santa Fe culture, and history, they also demonstrate aggression against established Native American leadership, as these groups also want to eventually revamp Native American life, even who can be considered Native American and even what the Pueblos are called. They want to take over everything. If you're a local activist in Santa Fe, I want you to hear this, because you are directly working to subvert leadership in all communities in our triculture city. This concludes part 2 of the series In Defense of Santa Fe. I know it was a lot and a little intense, but Santa Fe, you need to know this stuff. And if we stick together, we can prevail and retain our historic identities. We can strengthen our sense of community with one another and with our Native American friends and neighbors based on hard truths, not exaggerations and lies about history, not by singling out one culture as bad and the other is good. Guys, it's never been that simple, and it's not that simple here. Later in the series, I will explain how we can win this, so be of good cheer, friends. Stay with me, because in part 3, I will deal with what is known about the mayor's actions and his behind-the-scenes relationship with the Three Sisters Collective. I will make the case that his last concern is for the Spanish community in Santa Fe. And more than that, the fact that he has greatly, repeatedly harmed and insulted the Spanish community, all while using words like reconciliation and peace. Thanks for joining in, Santa Fe, and wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Lord.